Hello. So this video will wrap our discussion of Chapter 2 of Simone de Beauvoir's Ethics of Ambiguity. I just want to say a few things about her comments on the artist and writer that appear at the end of this chapter. I'm going to augment a little bit with some material from an essay about metaphysics and literature that can be found in the Philosophical Writings text. I find it will be useful just to have some sense of how does Beauvoir conceptualize literature? What is literature for? What is it supposed to be doing in her mind, especially on a philosophical level? Since what she says here does, I think, seem to put the writer and the artist in a more favorable position than it does the other forms of bad faith. Of course, there are problems with the artist and the writer becoming too self-absorbed, wrapped up in the work, and so on and so forth. But I think it's also true that the artist and the writer give us kind of a glimpse of how authenticity works a little bit and how an authentic expression of one's situation is possible through art and literature particularly. So a little bit of material from this essay will help clarify some of what Beauvoir is saying here. So just right away, she leads into this discussion from the passionate one. She says we have seen that the serious contradicts itself by the fact that not everything can be taken seriously, slips into a partial nihilism, but nihilism is unstable. It tends to return to the positive. So again, we've done some discussions of these issues already. Critical thought attempts to militate everywhere against all aspects of the serious, but without foundering in the anguish of pure negation. It sets up a superior, universal, and timeless value, objective truth. And correlatively, the critic defines himself positively as the independence of the mind, crystallizing the negative movement of the criticism of values into a positive reality. He also crystallizes the negativity proper to all mind into a positive presence. Thus he thinks that he himself escapes all earthly criticism. He does not have to choose between the highway and the native, between America and Russia, between production and freedom. He understands, dominates, and rejects, in the name of total truth, the necessarily partial truth, which every human engagement discloses. Now here is where we're getting into what it is that art and literature become capable of in a way, through this disclosure of these situated and therefore partial truths. We talk about, I think the critic will also become a little more clear when we talk about the aesthetic attitude in the next chapter. So maybe we can just put that on the back burner for a second, and when we turn to the aesthetic attitude, we can talk a little bit about the role of criticism therein. So, when we turn then to the artist and the writer force themselves to surmount existence in another way. They attempt to realize it as an absolute. What makes their effort genuine? So now we're getting a taste or a glimpse of authenticity. What makes it genuine is that they do not propose to attain being. So immediately, of course, we can see that one way that the writer or the artist can go wrong or can fall short of the ideal is when they think that they've attained being. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? It is existence which they are trying to pin down and make eternal. That's what you shouldn't be trying to do, right? The word, the stroke, the very marble indicate the object insofar as it is an absence. Only in the work of art, the lack of being returns to the positive. Time is stopped. Clear forms and finished meanings rise up. In this return, existence is confirmed and establishes its own justification. So the artist or the writer is able to express through an objective manifestation the very sort of temporal dimension of subjectivity. They're doing almost a kind of translation work from the inner life of the for itself, which has its projects and goals and so on, into an object to render it in a certain way. this is one reason why Beauvoir particularly likes literature, because literature is capable of giving us some insight into the human condition as it is lived. And it's always a particularly lived condition. It's not giving us a glimpse of everybody everywhere all the time. It's always like this character with these experiences and so on and so forth. But that gives us access to a certain truth insofar as it speaks to us and discloses that truth through the literary work, right? It's really important. So if we turn to this other essay on literature and metaphysics, she says, certainly a work always signifies something. Even one that deliberately seeks to refuse all meaning still conveys this refusal. There you can see what we've already discussed about surrealism or Dada, absurdist theater, something like that. There you can see again reiterated the same basic point. But the adversaries of philosophical literature argue rightly that the signification of a novel or a play or a poem, for that matter, cannot be translated into abstract concepts. The novel is justified only if it is a mode of communication irreducible to any other. While the philosopher and the essayist give the reader an intellectual reconstruction of their experience, the novelist, this kind of literary writer, the writer as artist, the novelist claims to reconstitute on an imaginary plane this experience itself, as it appears prior to any elucidation. So they attempt to do so. They claim to reconstitute on the imaginary plane this experience itself as it appears prior to any elucidation. In the real world, the meaning of an object is not a concept graspable by pure understanding. Its meaning is the object as it is disclosed to us in the overall relation we sustain with it, in which is action, emotion, and feeling. We ask novelists to evoke this flesh and blood presence, whose complexity and singular and infinite richness exceed any subjective interpretation. She says again, the novel is endowed with value and dignity only if it constitutes a living discovery for the author as the reader. So the act of writing itself is a movement of disclosure that serves as a discovery for the author as well as for the reader. It's a working through and a realization of the lived experience that then renders it into a written work. So there is the same tension and ambiguity in literature and art, if it's to be philosophical, as there is in the human condition itself. Being as both an object and as something for itself. Because once you engage with the work, you're reading it or experiencing it over time and so on and so forth, and your engagement with it is reconstituting that meaning there again as you engage with it. The act of engagement with the work of art reconstitutes the being for itself of the art as it was written by the artist, as it is a human and manifestation of a human project and condition. So again, that ambiguity of being an object on the one hand, that is words written down on the page, marble cut in a certain way and so on, while also expressing something on the symbolic order, manifests the same ambiguity that we find within the human condition itself, and does so exactly because it is the disclosure and project of an artist that is in the public sphere and can be engaged with by a public or an audience. And thus the work of art becomes something sort of for itself in a way because it's detached from the author ultimately, even though it's a disclosure from their pen or so on, right? So that is helpful to understand exactly why Beauvoir seems to place the artist and literature in kind of a special position, and we get a glimpse of authenticity exactly where she takes up a discussion of the artist and the writer. So you can see, to go back to the ethics of ambiguity, just a little later she says, there is no way for a man to escape this world. It is in this world that, avoiding the pitfalls we have just pointed out, that he must realize himself morally. So avoiding the pitfalls that we've just been going over for the past couple of videos and in the last several pages of this chapter. Freedom must project itself toward its own reality through a content whose value it establishes. An end is valid only by a return to the freedom which established it and which willed itself through this end. But this will implies that freedom is not to be engulfed in any goal, neither is it to dissipate itself vainly without aiming at a goal. It is not necessary for the subject to seek to be, but it must desire that there be being. So the project of the work of art, you saw the language of return again in the literature and metaphysics. So there's the play between the artist projecting the project that aims at a certain goal, and then the completion of the work of art that then remains open for the audience to then engage in it. So there's this play back and forth where the end can always be reestablished in relationship to the work of art, which was itself the sort of aim or goal of the author, but then transcends that completion. So again, the ambiguity that we saw between the beginning and the end. The artist completes the work. They have as their goal the end of the artwork, but then the end transcends the artist themselves and is freed for the audience to then pick up as part of their own aim or their own project. And so it still has the end reinscribing the meaning and generating the value and so on. Right? She talks about the importance of communication as well, because of course as an expression and a disclosure, the artwork and the literature is rooted in a communicative act. It's a communication. That's what disclosure is in a certain sense. It communes with others and communicates to them. To will that there be being is also to will that there be men, by and for whom the world is endowed with human significations. One can reveal the world only on the basis revealed by other men. No project can be defined except by its interference with other projects. To make being be is to communicate with others by means of being. So again, because it is communicative, because it establishes a disclosure that relates the artist to the audience and audiences to each other, and it establishes an object in the world with which one can commune, the work of art or the literature takes on a certain special value. So the egoism of the artist is particularly pernicious here, because it risks this kind of profound act of disclosure. If the opportunity for authenticity here is very high and poignant, then what can be missed by it, or when the artist fails in certain ways, that's all the worst. So you also see here, I think, we've talked about this, and I've mentioned this in other videos, and it's been a theme anytime I talk about existentialism. So if you want to go back and look at the Being for a Lack video, or the Bad Faith video, or the first video in the discussion of the Ethics of Ambiguity, she gives another argument against solipsism here. Again, because to disclose and to act meaningfully is to act for others, to present to them certain opportunities or certain hindrances, to take their being in the world seriously, to manifest yourself in the eyes of others, and so on. No artist really does anything in isolation, even if they're like a hermit. That's still a kind of negative relation to society, and the work of art discloses to others. It's done for the other in a way. So she gives an argument against solipsism here at the very end of this chapter. And she really closes the chapter out by emphasizing this relationship. You flee the existence of others only by fleeing yourself. And as soon as he exists, he answers. She writes, "It may perhaps be said that it is for himself that he is moral, and that such an attitude is egotistical. But there is no ethics against which this charge, which immediately destroys itself, cannot be leveled. For how can I worry about what does not concern me? I concern others, and they concern me. There we have an irreducible truth. The me-others relationship is as indissoluble as the subject-object relationship." At the same time, the other charge, which is often directed at existentialism, also collapses, of being a formal doctrine, incapable of proposing any content to the freedom which it once engaged. To will oneself free is also to will others free. This will is not an abstract formula. It points out each person concrete action to be achieved. And so again, here's another argument that is deployed in favor of freedom as not an abstract value, but the very concrete value that enables us to have any project or relationship with others exactly in the particularity that we do have it. Right? So you see another version of the argument for freedom as the concrete value being recommended by existentialism and not a mere empty formality. And this is really something spoken against Kant. Kant is the empty formalist of freedom from Beauvoir's perspective, and what she's attempting to do is bring freedom down to earth, so to speak, and flesh it out in the concrete relations and the particularities that we have amongst other people in a particular situation from which we engage the world in that capacity for freedom. So it's not a mere formalism, and from Beauvoir's perspective, it puts real constraints on how we act. And art and literature is important because it can help to disclose this. And reveal the human condition in its very ambiguity through the engagement with and the production of works of art. So that last section is, I think, a really important part of not just the Ethics of Ambiguity, but of Beauvoir's existentialist philosophy broadly construed. And she writes about these themes many other places. Again, I've pointed but one other essay that she discusses similar themes here. Again, that's in that philosophical writings text. So that is how she ends the second chapter, and we will pick up in the next video at the beginning of chapter 3 and talk a bit more about sort of the positive elements of freedom. Okay, so thanks for your attention. Thanks for your attention there. And I'll see you in the next video.